ZTE was first founded way back in 1985. 22 years down the line in 2007, ZTE released their very first cell phone, you know, one of those phones with a physical keyboard and no touchscreen. In 2012, ZTE became the fourth largest mobile phone provider in the world, delivering 7.5 million smartphones. In 2015, ZTE released their very first Axon branded smartphone, which was actually the world's first dual camera phone. In 2016, they released the world's first dual stereo speakerphone. In 2017, the first foldable dual screen smartphone. In 2019, the first commercial 5G phone. In 2020, they released the Axon 20, which was the first mass-produced smartphone on the planet to house an under-display selfie camera. It's now 2021, and instead of ZTE releasing another world's first, they have decided to improve on last year's Axon 20 with this, the ZTE Axon 30 5G. Which houses ZTE's second generation under-display camera technology. The Axon 30 5G comes in two different color variants, one being black and one being aqua. The black one actually has a holographic color effect on the back. It does shine now and then in sunlight, not too much indoors. It still looks really classy and elegant when the holographic effect isn't showing, however. I really do like the design and packed inside. That is a Snapdragon 870, a 4200 mAh battery, 65 watt wide charging, 5G, Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.1 and NFC. We have Gorilla Glass on the front, a plastic back and plastic frame. And yes, that backplate does pick up a fair share of fingerprints thanks to its glossy finish. And slapping on that hard case shell cover out the box doesn't make it look too bad actually. I might keep this on going forward inevitably. We have a textured power button, a volume rocker on the right hand side. At the bottom we have a dual SIM 5G standby tray, and yes, it does support expandable storage, which is great, and there is a water resistant seal too. We have USB 3.0 ports at the bottom, a single downward firing speaker with DTS:X Ultra, and of course an under display selfie camera. It is indeed the second generation, which we'll touch on later. Flicking it around and you can see that the camera module on the back is not too tiny, since it does have more than capable cameras, which once again we'll get to later. The camera bump is quite large, not the largest I've seen around, but not the smallest I've seen around, meaning that there is a fair share of camera wobble when on a flat surface. Comparing the designs to other phones around, I can say that the Axon 30 5G truly does stand out to other devices. Nothing else out there looks quite like it. I really do dig it, and weighing in at just 189 grams and 7.8 millimeters thick. The back looks phenomenal, but what about the display? Well, we are welcome to a 6.92 inch AMOLED curved display. It has an aspect ratio of 20.5 by 9. It is of course Full HD Plus with a pixels per inch of 388. We have 1 billion colors. It is of course 10 bits, 100% DCI-P3, 950 nits of peak brightness, 120 Hz refresh rates, and 360 Hz touch sampling rates. The Axon 30 of course has the second generation under display camera, which actually utilizes 7 layers over the camera and has a screen of 400 pixels per inch, matching the rest of the display going over that lens. Just to be 100% clear right now, this photo is actually last year's ZTE Axon 20. This is ZTE's first generation under display camera tech, and as you can see, that pixelated effect, that little square block at the top of the phone, is very much visible because it was only coated with 5 layers and the screen covering over the lens was only 200 ppi. And switching back to the Axon 30 over here, we of course have those 7 layers, starting with the baseboard glass, transparent matrix, specialized OLED, transparent cathode, packing glass, polarizer, and of course the cover glass right at the top. It is also worth mentioning that they have now improved the circuit board, which is now a multi-drive ACE circuit board and apparently increases efficiency by up to 50%. ZTE have also used smart pixel enhancement as well as display optimization algorithms to make sure that you can barely see that tucked away hidden selfie cam. And when comparing it to its more expensive brother, the Axon 30 Ultra on the right hand side, it still has that punch hole notch at the top, meaning that the Axon 30 is ZTE's only device that gives you a true bezel-less display and of course hides that selfie cam better than they ever have before. I've got to give it to ZTE over here. They have done just as good of a job with their second generation under display selfie cam as Xiaomi have done with their third generation one under the screen of the Mix 4. You've also got to bear in mind that the Mix 4 is only available in China and has no plans of coming to the global market, whereas the Axon 30 is available to everyone around the world. The color accuracy of the Axon 30 is on par with many other smartphones around, and it does look very vibrant in terms of color accuracy, which is great, as well as being extremely bright at 950 nits of peak brightness, which is not the brightest around, but is certainly brighter than other ZTE made devices and looks just on par in terms of brightness with other phones around. Of course, once again, no punch hole at the top, which is fantastic. Of course, we also have 120 Hz refresh rate, bumping up from last year's Axon 20's 90 Hz refresh rate, but slightly less than the Red Magic 6R on the left-hand side and ZTE Axon 30 Ultra next to that at 144 Hz. It is slightly higher than the Oppo Reno 6 Pro Plus's 90 Hz on the right-hand side and matches the Mix 4's 120 Hz. It is nice and fluid, and I honestly don't feel like you need anything more than 120 Hz. It is just so darn buttery smooth. Of course, we do have an auto refresh rate, but no adaptive refresh rate option. We have other things such as brightness levels, of course, night light. We can also jump into different color modes and color temperature modes. We can even hide the status bar at the top, giving you a black bar, but that kind of defeats the purpose of this device. And you can set that to certain apps. Of course, we also have dark mode, giving the background a very nice deep dark black. It works on third-party apps as well as first-party apps too. And we also have an always on display, though not much customization options. There are a ton of different clocks that come preset in the phone and a bunch of different animated ones which look fantastic. My favorite one is the spiral over here, this purple greenish glow spiral. And yes, we do have an under display optical fingerprint sensor, not the largest one I've seen around, but it does do a fantastic job and is quite snappy, even a tad snappier than the Axon 30 Ultra, though it's using the same sensor, similar sensor to the Red Magic 6R. It is a tad snappier than the Mix 4 in terms of animations, but not in terms of hardware when it comes to the fingerprint sensor. Same thing when it comes to the Reno 6 Pro Plus. Another thing worth mentioning here is that there is no form of facial recognition, which we did see in last year's Axon 20, though that under display selfie cam does indeed house a 16 megapixel 2.24 micron 4-in-1 sensor. So let's go ahead and have a look to see if it's truly improved. The actual selfie doesn't look half bad, not as good as other flagship phones around. Edge detection is pretty terrible, but the actual photo looks great, but it does use a binning effect when dropping down to portrait, something to bear in mind. This is TechNeck recording a 1080p at 30 FPS video using the brand new ZTE Axon 30. This is not the Axon 30 Pro or Ultra. This is the one with the selfie cam underneath the display. So let me know what you guys think of the video quality and audio quality when recording a video with the selfie cam on the Axon 30. To use multi-camera to record different things using the selfie cam mixed with the back cam, vice versa, switching between two back cams and one selfie cam. It's pretty cool. It's not too bad. I like it a lot. I don't know when I'd use it, but it's a cool feature to have nonetheless. Of course, we can also record using the selfie cam at night, and being that the selfie cam is hidden under the display doesn't do a half bad job, but you can see the pixelizations around the trees in the background even when taking a selfie over here. With the flash on, it kind of reduces that effect. At the back, we have an 8 megapixel ultra wide sensor with 120 degrees field of view, a 64 megapixel IMX682 main sensor, a 5 megapixel macro sensor, and 2 megapixel depth sensor. They have improved the main sensor since last year's Axon 20, as well as the macro sensor, but the ultra wide and depth sensor have remained the same. The ultra wide shot may have a low megapixel count, but it still comes out pretty decently. The 64 megapixel main looks fantastic. Dropping it down to 60 megapixel using pixel binning looks even better thanks to AI. 2 times digital zoom, no optical zoom over here since there's no telephoto, doesn't look too bad. 5 times doesn't even look too bad. 10 times is still viewable. 20 times is, let's not really go there, but that is the max zoom that you can do with this phone. When it comes to taking a snap of me using portrait mode, it looks fantastic, but jumping into the 2 megapixel depth effect sense over there kind of messes with the edge detection in the background, but it is not the case when it comes to objects, which look fantastic. Of course, we can also use that 5 megapixel macro mode sensor, which does a more than decent job. We do have 4K at 60 frames per second over here, no 8K available. This is using gyro electronic image stabilization when it comes to video on all cameras over here, it does a pretty decent job in terms of stabilization, quality, as well as brightness. It is a pretty gloomy day here in Shanghai when I decided to take these snaps and videos. So if things don't look overly bright, that is the reason why. We also have 1080p at 30 frames per second using the ultra wide, but this is the max resolution and frames per second you can use when recording with the ultra wide camera. Of course, we can also test out the stability over here. It's called stabilizer in settings with it off. It is shockingly terrible. Switching it on though, you can't even notice that I'm running here, though it does take away from the focusing as well as the quality detail. 4K 60 FPS at night has some serious focusing issues. I'm sure this will be fixed with a future software update, but dropping down 4K to 30 frames per second using the main sensor over here, the focusing issue has been resolved. Same thing with 1080p at 60 frames per second. Once again, giving those focusing issues. Using it at 60 frames per second seems to be the issue when recording at night, though it is known to use lower frames at night since you get a brighter output image anyway. So 1080p at 30 FPS at night doesn't look half bad. 1080p at 30 FPS ultra wide, however, is pretty much unusable, but we do have the ultra wide snap. Doesn't look the best with no night mode option. Night mode off using the main. Looks alright. Night mode on doesn't brighten it up. It gives it a lot more detail. 2x digital zoom with night mode off doesn't look the best. Night mode on, once again, more detail again, darkening up some of the blacks. And with 5x digital zoom with night mode off doesn't look good. Night mode on doesn't look good. 10x digital zoom once again, night mode off. Pretty much unusable, same as with night mode on. 20x digital zoom does have a night mode feature, but reverts to 10x zoom, which is pretty strange. We do have a MyOS 11 skinned over Android 11 over here. It is upgraded from the My flavor that we saw last year. I say My because I don't want to say me to kind of mess around with other companies around. Anyway, the software is pretty great. A near stock Android experience with a bunch of extra features such as Z-Pop, multitasking, of course, as well as changing the sensitivity for the full screen gestures and mistouch prevention, as well as shaking your phone to turn on your flashlight. All right. We also have Google services, of course, apart from digital well-being, which is great. We have Google Discover on the left-hand side, the Play Store that works perfectly fine, the Google search bar, as well as Google Assistant pulling in from the bottom left corner, and I had no issues activating it this time around. The haptics are pretty decent for a phone at this price range, and we do have one single downward firing speaker. So how does it compare to other phones around? Before we jump straight into gaming, it is worth mentioning that we do have a triple cooling system this time around, which is fantastic. Starting off with Genshin Impact over here using the highest possible graphic settings and the maximum FPS available. The game is capped at 60 frames per second, so it's not the phone limiting the 60 FPS cap, but the game. And we're getting a pretty solid between 45 and 57 frames per second in Genshin Impact, which is one of the most graphically demanding games on a phone to date. Moving over to PUBG Mobile over here using HDR graphics and extreme FPS. There is no smooth 90 FPS option yet. I'm pretty sure this will change with a future update since the phone just released, but we are getting a rock solid 60 FPS when using HDR graphics, which allowed me to get quite a few good kills. Moving on to Bullet Force over here using ultra graphics, max FPS. Once again, the game has no frames per second cap, but the Axon 30 is capping it at 60 FPS, or I could say the game is, since it doesn't support the phone yet. Once again, I'm pretty sure this will change going forward. The same thing can be said with Dead Trigger 2. Moving on over here, we do not have the ultra graphics mode, we only have high, and we don't have 120 FPS mode, we only have 60. This is a game with, once again, an unlimited frames per second cap, though the Axon 30 is capping it at 60. Once again, probably the game just needs to update their actual game from the devs. A game that does support 120 on this phone is Real Racing 3. You can't adjust the graphics or frames per second, but it is sitting at max graphics, 120 FPS, Really stable here between 118 and 121. But what about benchmarks? Well, we do, of course, have that Snapdragon 870 with an Adreno 650 integrated GPU. Checking the battery and the temps at the start of the test. We'll compare this at the end of the test, starting off with AnTuTu version 9.1.3. Boosting through this, then we're going to jump straight through testing out the CPU in Geekbench version 5.4.1 and ending off with 3D Mark Wildlife, which just stress tests the GPU, and getting to our battery drain results with that 4200 milliamp hour battery. It drained by 9% with a rate of 23.6 milliamp hours per minute, and the temperature increased by 18.7 degrees in Celsius. It didn't score too badly in AnTuTu at all, with just shy of 700,000 points, putting it slightly above the average Snapdragon 870 powered smartphone. Things are slightly worse in terms of focusing on CPU here with Geekbench. We got a single core score of 723 and multi-core of 2884. The multi-core score is really not that bad compared to the average Snapdragon 870 scores, actually slightly better than that, but the single core is where it kind of dropped the ball here. Things are starting to look up again once we move into GPU stress testing here with 3D Mark Wildlife, getting a score of 4232 and an average frames per second of 25.3, which once again puts it ahead of the average Snapdragon 870 and just a tad behind the slightly beefier 5nm run Snapdragon 888 and 888 Plus chipsets. The ZTE Axon 35G certainly stands out thanks to its glossy backplate with a holographic color effect design and nanoscale micro beam textured finish. The back camera design is certainly a step up from last year's, and the overall camera quality has improved too. But there are a few focusing issues, and the lack of a telephoto lens may be a deal breaker for some. However, the display is where the Axon 30 truly shines, thanks to ZTE's second generation under display camera, which has not only improved in terms of picture quality, but in visibility too, thanks to having a 400 pixels per inch screen, covering it quite well, giving you an uninterrupted, bright, colorful, and vibrant, huge 6.92 inch AMOLED display. Software has also seen an improvement with macOS 11, giving the phone a near stock-like Android experience. Hardware has been upgraded too, thanks to the Snapdragon 870 CPU, LPDDR5 RAM, and UFS 3.1 storage, and when paired with the increased 120Hz refresh rate, runs supported games ridiculously well. The ZTE Axon 30 may not be alone in the smartphone industry, but it certainly stands out thanks to that hidden selfie camera. And while the Xiaomi Mix 4 also houses in-display camera tech and provides more impressive hardware, it costs quite a bit more and is only available in China. That leaves us with this, the ZTE Axon 35G. A smartphone that checks all the right boxes and exceeds my expectations for its very low asking price. But more importantly, it's the only smartphone in the global market right now to implement under-display selfie camera tech extremely well.